Good morning. Welcome again to the services of the Parish Church of Christ. We're so glad that you're here today on this first day of the week and thankful for the opportunity to worship our good God together through song and prayer, the remembrance of the Lord's Supper, through giving back of our means, and for listening to the Word of God. There were four preachers who like to get together from time to time and fellowship with each other and build each other up. And on one particular day, they decided that they needed to confess their sins to each other. And they reasoned that they often encouraged the members of their congregations to confess, and they understood that the prayer of a righteous man has great power as it's working. And so, one by one, they began to tell of their weaknesses. And the first said, I really have a problem doing my work. I just like to slip away and go to a movie or do something else instead of working for the Lord. Another one said, I like to smoke cigars in the back room from time to time. The third said, well, I like to gamble when I play cards. But the fourth one would not speak. And so as the three continued to encourage him, finally he said, okay. I like to gossip, and I just can't wait to get out of here. Oh, man. That's not funny? Well, okay. We come to the sixth item of the 7 detestable things, 7 things that God says He hates. It is a false witness who breathes out lies. This is a person who uses his words or her words to hurt other people, regardless of whether or not those words are true. And as we think about this sixth thing on the list, we're going to turn to Proverbs chapter 26. Proverbs chapter 26, where we find the wise man describing a false witness. And he gives really 3 profiles of the false witness: the deceiver, the quarreler, and the whisperer. And we're going to look at each of these as we think about a false witness. So the first one is the deceiver, there in Proverbs chapter 26, beginning at verse 18. This is what the wise man says, Proverbs chapter 26, verse 18. Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I am only joking. We come down to verse 23. He says, like the glaze covering an earthen vessel are fervent lips with an evil heart. Whoever hates disguises himself with his lips and harbors deceit in his heart. When he speaks graciously, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred be covered with deception, his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. I want to notice a few things about the deceiver as we begin. First of all, we'll notice that the wise man is using a device called simile. It's a form of metaphor in which you compare 2 things using words like and as. And so you see that like a madman and like the glaze. And so he is helping to paint a picture for us of what this person is like. And so he says, the deceiver is like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death. He is the one who deceives his neighbor and says, I'm only joking. A firebrand is a fiery dart, a flaming arrow, something like that. He does harm, and he covers it up by saying, I'm only joking. You know, it's kind of funny to think about the fact that when Solomon was alive, people would say hurtful things and then just say, just kidding. That's not just a 21st century problem. That's what Solomon says was happening even in his day. Furthermore, he goes on in verses 23 through 26 to describe this deceitful person. And you notice there that we skipped over the middle verses. What Solomon has done is he's kind of bookended the 3 different profiles with the deceiver. In verses 18 and 19 and then 23 through 26. And what we'll see as we go through these different profiles is that all of them include some amount of deception, of telling of what is not true. And so he describes in verses 23 through 26, using these images, three different ways, if you will, that the deceitful person puts on a facade. They put up a false front. They put on something on the outside that makes them look nice, but on the inside they're wicked and unkind. But notice what is said in verse 26. Though his hatred be covered with deception, his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. The truth will come out. Have you ever been around someone who treated you one way when it was just the two of you, and another way when other people were watching? The truth will come out. This is the deceiver. There's a story told by a man in the Reader's Digest. He had gone to an auction, junior cattle show kind of thing, FFA, something like that. And a young lady had a lamb. And as the lamb was being auctioned, the price reached $5 a pound, and she began to cry. And then as the price reached $10 a pound, she began to hug that lamb so closely and cry even more. And eventually, the price reached $1,000 for that lamb. And the buyer at auction, after he purchased the lamb, announced to the group that he was going to give the lamb back to the little girl. Now, this reader that had written into the Reader's Digest said, "It wasn't much long thereafter that I was judging a statewide contest of essays by students in the state. And an essay came in written by a little girl about winning the prize auction at FFA or whatever it was. And she wrote about how she became so happy that the price was rising that she began to cry. And that the higher the price got, the happier she was, the more she cried. And then at the end of the auction, that not only did she receive this incredible price for her lamb, but she also got the lamb back. And she took it home and her daddy barbecued it. And she said it was the best barbecue she'd ever had." That's the way the deceiver will treat you. A couple of things we need to take away from this. First of all, deceit doesn't pay. The wise man says in Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 9, "A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will perish." God hates not the person, but the activity of the person, the false witness who breathes out lies. And if they do not turn away from that, he will punish them. But the other thing that we need to think about as God's people is this. God's people must be real. We must be genuine. We must be authentic. Because we have left behind the things of the world. We have left behind deceit. We have left behind dishonesty. And so we must be honest and real. This is what Paul writes in Colossians chapter 3, beginning at verse 9. "Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator." We have to be real with each other. If we have a problem, that's one of the things about this deceiver. Inwardly, they hate other people, but they put on a false front about it. If we have a problem with anyone else, including our fellow Christians, we need to be real with them. We need to do so in kindness, but we also need to be honest when we speak to one another and address the issues that are between us with honesty, humility, and kindness. The deceiver puts up a false front, but God will punish deceit. Next, we notice in Proverbs 26, the quarreler. Notice what is said in verses 20 and 21. "For lack of wood the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. As charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife." And we will come back in a moment and address that whisperer that's mentioned in verse 20. But here we think about the quarreler. The quarreler is the one who adds fuel to the fire. Now, what the wise man says here is kind of obvious, isn't it? If you don't start arguments, there won't be arguments. If there's no one there to start an argument, there won't be an argument. Well, that seems pretty clear, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And yet, even though all of humanity knows this, we still have arguments, don't we? We have to recognize that we have the power of peace in our hands. Usually the power of peace is in our tongues because we choose what we say and do not say. But the quarreler is the one who is always looking for a fight, who's always looking to make trouble. And you've known someone like this who feeds off of drama, who lives to add fuel to the fire, but nothing good comes from it. I love this. I found this as I was studying. It's called a horse can't pull. A horse can't pull while kicking. This fact we merely mention. And he can't kick while pulling, which is our chief contention. Let's imitate the good old horse and lead a life that's fitting. Just pull an honest load, and then there'll be no time for kicking. A horse can't pull while kicking. Can't kick while pulling. If you pull your load, you don't have time to argue. See, God has made us stewards of the things that He's given us. And when we spend our time quarreling, we fritter away the blessings that He's given to us. The wise man says in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 3, "It is an honor for a man to keep aloof from strife, but every fool will be quarreling." Think about how much time we waste by arguing over things. Think about how many times we've hurt one another's feelings needlessly because we had to argue about something. Now, there's obviously a time and a place to reason through things with one another, to think through something and discuss the pros and the cons. And there's even a time when we need to clear the air, if you will, between us because of the actions that we have taken. But arguing, quarreling, never leads to peace. It just wastes away time and it hurts friendships, destroys relationships, and it distracts us from the things that really matter. And so God's people should be peaceable. God's people should be peaceable. I love what Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2. He's speaking as an older man to a younger man, and not only to a younger man, but Timothy is responsible for the leadership of a congregation, and yet I think what he says to him applies to all of us. Have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know they breed quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil. Just think about the fact that as Christians, you and I serve the Prince of Peace, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. That you and I as Christians have been called to peace. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 15. And God has blessed us in so many ways. And we must be stewards of those blessings. Quarreling is not only bad stewardship of our blessings, but it destroys them. And for what? How many times have you walked away from an argument and felt like you really gained something? Even if you win the argument, what have you really gained? The quarreler, the deceiver, and last but not least, the whisperer. This is what the wise man says in Proverbs 26:22. The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. Now, this is probably the most difficult verse in this chapter. What does the wise man mean that the words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels and they go down into the inner parts of the body? Well, nobody is exactly sure because you can look at a number of translations and find a number of different explanations. The paraphrase called the Good News Translation says it like this: "Gossip is so tasty, how we love to swallow it." That seems to almost put a positive light on the fact that, every sin we commit, every sin because at least at first it looks good. And so the Good News Translation paints this as, this is the enticing side of gossip. The King James Version kind of paints it the other direction and says this: "The words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost parts." And so what exactly is the wise man saying? Well, I think we can take a couple of things away. First of all, people are going to take gossip to heart. They're going to take it to heart. And so whether you say it to them to hurt them or to hurt someone else, they're going to remember it, they're going to pass it along, and eventually it's going to hurt someone else. But also, gossip is usually wrapped up in a really attractive package. It's like a morsel, a delicious taste. We say today, juicy. I've got some juicy news to share with you. But the end of it is destruction. Now, a couple of things here. Gossip is the most deadly microbe. It has neither legs nor wings. It is composed entirely of tails, and most of them have stings. Tails, T-A-L-E-S. The story is told of a man who spent all of his time gossiping. And so he went to one of the wisest men in town when he realized just how much damage he had done. And he said, "I have hurt so many people. Is there any way that I can take back what I have done?" And the wise man said, "You need to get 2 down pillows and carry them into the center of town and cut them open and shake them out, and then come back to me." So the man did as he was told, came back to the wise man and said, "I've shaken all the feathers out." And the wise man said, "Now you go back and collect all those feathers." That's the way it is with gossip, isn't it? Something that could be said in just a moment can have an impact for an untold amount of time, can hurt an untold number of people. And the whisperer does this because they find pleasure in it, like a delicious morsel. But the fact is, words cannot be unspoken. Again, hear the words of the wise man, Proverbs 11 and verse 9. "With his mouth the godless man would destroy his neighbor, but by knowledge the righteous are delivered." Once you've spoken a word, you can't take it back. Words have consequences. So we have to take care in what we say. We have to think before we speak. But the whisperer has one goal: to feel good. And so they will say things that aren't true, or that they have not confirmed, or that they even know are true, but that will hurt someone else because it makes them feel good. But once that word is spoken, it cannot be taken back. And so God's people should be reserved. And now what do we mean by reserved? Well, I think James describes it pretty well in James chapter 1, verse 26. "If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless." It's not that you have to be shy to be a Christian. It's not that you have to be of even a quiet personality, but you do have to guard your words. You do have to be careful what you say. You see, the whisperer, the quarreler, and the deceiver all have one thing in common. They don't value the truth, and they don't value other people. It's not that something that is whispered is necessarily untrue, but that doesn't matter to the gossip. It's not that the things that are said in an argument are always untrue, but that doesn't matter to the quarreler. And the deceiver is all about putting up a false front. But all of those things end up hurting other people. And that's just not what God wants for us, is it? You've heard of Aesop. Told a number of moral stories. One that he tells is of a donkey who finds the skin of a lion. And the donkey puts on the lion's skin and begins to roam around, scaring all of the other animals. Eventually encounters a fox who is looking the lion over, feeling like something's not quite right. And when the donkey realizes that the fox is not afraid, he begins to try to roar like a lion, but it just comes out as a bray. The fox says, "You might have scared me if you hadn't spoken." Deceit will be found out. Whether we deceive as a gossip, as a quarreler, or we put up a false front, we will be found out. And even if it's not in this life, we will face the one who knows all and who always tells what is right and true, and we will be called to account. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him. The 6th on that list is a false witness who breathes out lies, someone who does not value the truth and therefore does not value other people. But God's people are real. God's people are peaceable. And God's people are reserved. Because we serve a God who loves us and who loves everyone and values the truth. So if you want to serve that God today, if you want to return to Him because you've strayed as a Christian or because you want to put on Jesus Christ and be forgiven of your sins, this invitation is for you as we stand and sing together.